Welcome to IP Goes Pop, your source for exploring the interface between intellectual property and pop culture. The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com. This program should not be considered legal advice. Please consult an attorney for your specific situation. And now your host, intellectual property attorney, Michael Snyder.
Greetings and cheers, listeners of IP Goes Pop. Welcome again to another episode. I want to thank everyone for the great feedback and reactions to the episodes that we've been recording. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting topics. Today will be no different as we talk about patents to the stars. As you stroll down Hollywood Boulevard, some of those names on those stars will in fact have patents that they have filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office and actually receive some protection for their inventions. So we'll talk about that today. Remembering again, though, this disclaimer, this is not legal advice, although it may be interesting and maybe one day you will be trapped on an elevator when people are, again, trapped on elevators together. And you'll have something to talk about. You'll talk about this podcast, perhaps, or perhaps you'll start to talk about this podcast and the other person will just become very uncomfortable and stare at the elevator numbers, which is pretty common. But hopefully we'll return to that soon. Now, talking about patents, setting the table today, anyone can get a patent, whether you've appeared on one episode of a sitcom with no lines, or you are incredibly famous, or you're another kind of inventor. But since we're talking about IP Goes Pop, we're running the gamut across the land of celebrity, across Hollywood, from politicians who are very famous to musicians to movie stars. You'll see that all of these celebrities have come up with inventions and someone either convinced them or they thought about themselves, hey, is this worth something so unique and novel and not obvious that it's worth protecting? Now, who can get a patent? Well, the Patent Act at 35 United States Code Section 101 says whoever invents or discovers any new and useful process, machine, manufacture, or composition of matter, or any new and useful improvement thereof may obtain a patent therefore, subject to the conditions and requirements of this title, the title being the Patent Act. So whoever, it's always a person. If you recall our prior episode on artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is not considered a person, I'll say yet. Who knows what the future will hold, but as of now, it can only be a person. But it could be any person. And let's talk about that. I do want to say that this episode is dedicated to one of my personal idols, someone I was a huge fan of and will remain a huge fan of, Eddie Van Halen, who unfortunately passed away recently. Van Halen, the band, happened to be the rock band that I followed. I won't say my whole life. There was a period we don't really talk about when it wasn't the original lineup, but that's for another non-IP Goes Pop podcast. But if I had a denim jacket in high school, I would have the Van Halen VH patch on the back. If I was drawing on my denim loose leaf cover notebook, I would be drawing the famous Van Halen VH winged logo on there. Just saying that out loud, by the way, reminds me of how much denim there was in the 1980s, which is interesting. But amongst all that denim, I became a fan of Van Halen, and Eddie Van Halen in particular, by many considered, one of the guitar gods, a genius on the guitar. I consider him my favorite guitarist and one of the greatest musicians of all time. If you haven't heard of Van Halen, I know that's an odd thing to say. I would advise you to check them out. They're an interesting band, and you may find something you like there. But Eddie Van Halen was famously an innovator, not just musically, but actually with the hardware that he worked with. He built many of his guitars. He was an electronics expert for musical instruments on his own, just through his tinkering in his lab, which later came to be known as 5150. And there's a famous story of producer Ted Templeman, who was the Van Halen producer, also was a musician and had some old beat up guitars around his apartment or house. One time Eddie came to visit. Uh, Ted Templeman said, "Excuse me, I'm still getting ready, so why don't you make yourself comfortable?" While Ted was getting ready to go out that evening, Eddie went and fixed all of the guitars laying around his apartment. And when Ted Templeman came out, Eddie said, "Oh, by the way, these all work now." So that was the kind of uh, it was another kind of genius that he had, not just a musical genius. And he probably came up with a lot more inventions than we see at the patent office. In fact, well, one of his famous guitars is the Frankenstrat guitar, which is cobbled together from a lot of different pieces of hardware. It almost looks like it's held together with duct tape. In fact, there was duct tape on it, holding parts of it together. And it was one of his early guitars that he created when he was trying to find this magic sound that only he could hear in his head, and then he shared with the world as part of Van Halen's music. So Eddie, he was an inventor, and he was able to obtain several patents. The first patent was called a musical instrument support. And again, with these show notes, we're going to have links to all of these patents. In this particular patent, and this is the one that you're seeing in all the tributes right now, when there's a lot of revisiting of his history, and they are showing, did you know that Eddie Van Halen had this patent? Well, he had multiple patents, but this is the one they always show because every patent has to have patent drawings, and they are usually done by a patent draftsperson or an engineering drawing specialist. And you can have those. They're really just to illustrate the patent. And often if something is used by a person, they might illustrate a person. It's usually very generic. Well, they're actually drawings of Eddie in this patent. You could tell it's him, of course. You could tell it's his technique. So this is patent US 4656917, if you want to look it up or don't have the show notes. Again, it's musical instrument support. And what it has to do with is Eddie Van Halen, if you don't know, was famous for his tapping technique, where he would press a finger down on the strings of the guitar between certain frets. And as you tap and pull away, it makes what's called a hammering technique. And guitar players out there, if I get anything wrong, sorry about that. I am a musician, but I might not get it exactly right. So please forgive me on that. But on this tapping technique, he would have to turn his guitar so his hands could reach in certain ways or reach to certain frets on the fretboard of the guitar. Now, sometimes he would have both hands over the top of the fretboard, almost like a keyboard. So you picture how you're playing piano, but you are playing a flattened guitar or a guitar held horizontally, so that he could do that at a live concert. This particular invention, the back of the guitar would have a hinged piece of wood, let's say, that could pull out, and you could flip your guitar up in the horizontal position, and that piece of wood would press against your body and hold it like a keyboard, so he could play his two-hand tapping technique like a keyboard, but on a guitar fretboard. And that's what this patent is directed to. The abstract of the patent says a supporting device for stringed instruments, for example, guitars, banjos, mandolins, and the like, is disclosed. The supporting device is constructed and arranged for supporting the musical instrument on the player to permit total freedom of the player's hands to play the instrument in a completely new way, thus allowing the player to create new techniques and sounds previously unknown. And then the patent claim says, and again, I think we talked about patent claims in an earlier episode of IP Goes Pop, but patent claims are written in a very technical way. They make sometimes a simple thing sound complicated. Sometimes they make a complicated thing sound simple. But this particular claim says a stringed instrument comprising an instrument body having front and rear surfaces, sound producing means extending over a portion of said front surface, and a device mounted onto said rear surface. Now, to interrupt myself, now we're getting to the patent, to the unique part of this particular patent by Eddie Van Halen. A device mounted onto said rear surface for positioning said instrument body at an angular orientation to a player's body. Said device, including attachment means movable between an inoperative position overlying said rear surface and an operative position at an angle to said rear surface, and on, generally meaning what I said at the beginning, which is you could have this piece that would pull out and press against the body, hold it stable so you could reach over the top and do a two-hand tapping technique. Now, how many guitarists, what's the advantage of this? How many guitarists could actually do this technique? Perhaps if they were trying to go for that Van Halen sound, they could, but I think that the only one who could really master this was Eddie Van Halen. Maybe Steve Vai. That's another podcast. We could debate it. Let's go to the next Eddie Van Halen patent. Eddie was also notorious for changing tunings of his guitar or wanting to change tunings on the fly. He would often have one normal or standard tuning. Then he would do what was called drop D tuning, or he would want to change the entirety of his tuning to modulate a key during a song. So the next patent was US 7183475, called Stringed Instrument with Adjustable String Tension Control. And this was a lever on part of the mechanics of the guitar, which you can flip the lever and it would change keys, change the tension of the strings, and therefore change keys from one key to another without the strings going out of tune. And that was really critical because it would be one thing to go back and forth with a lever to change how the strings are tensioned, but it's another thing to keep them in tune. So that was the string tensioner invention. His most recent issued patent from 2018, which is in the 10 million number series of patents, 10,115,383. It is called a humbucking pickup and method of providing permanent magnet extending through opposing coils parallel to string orientation. Now, it's a pretty complicated patent having to do with electromagnetics and sound, but it has to do with the ability to obtain a certain sound from the guitar. And this was featured on the EVH line of Wolfgang, named after Wolfgang Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen and Valerie Bertinelli's son, Wolfgang, who became the bass player for Van Halen. A way to obtain a certain sound, and it was a novel and unique way. And again, this was his last issued patent in 2018. Seems not that long ago. And finally, a design patent on a guitar peghead, which is the appearance of the end of his guitar. You could see it again on the EVH Wolfgang line of guitars. It's very distinctive. You could tell it right away. And we'll post pictures of that as well as a design patent with the show notes. And you'll see it on, it's a very popular series of guitars that a lot of musicians have started to use. And in fact, on Saturday Night Live last week, Jack White was the musical guest, and he did use one of these one of Eddie Van Halen's line of Wolfgang guitars, and you could see this design patent as the ornamental appearance of the end of that guitar. So a tribute from the patent world to Eddie Van Halen, an innovator and an inventor, and staying within music, another innovator, Prince. I would have thought he would have had more patents, but he has one design patent, which is design patent number D349127. It is for a portable electronic keyboard musical instrument. And what this is, if you were a music fan in the 80s, you know what a keytar is. That is a keyboard strung with a guitar strap over the shoulder to be played like a guitar. And this particular keytar, you can actually find images if you do a Google image search of Prince and the word keytar, Keytar, combination keyboard, combination guitar, you'll find it in the 1999 to 2001 era Prince. So this is if you're a Prince fan as I am, this is the rave unto the joy, fantastic era type of Prince. There are many eras of Prince. He was a musical chameleon in a way, always changing, but at the same time, always Prince. And this is the one design that he protected with a design patent. It's a very interesting looking keytar. As you can imagine, he was a very interesting performer as well. Of course, if you find a picture of it, guess what color it will be? If you guess purple, you're right. And staying with music, another innovator in music, Michael Jackson, has a pretty famous patent. I remember reading about this because at the time of the Smooth Criminal video, there is a part of the, not to put all these songs in your head, but there's a part of the Smooth Criminal video where there's, of course, unsurprisingly, a dance number. I know, can you believe it? In a Michael Jackson video, a dance number? Yes. Yes, there is. Where Michael Jackson and all of the backup dancers lean over, and it appears they're going to fall over, but they're leaned way over and they don't fall over, and then they come back up. And it's a famous move in the video. If you've ever seen it, I'm sure you recall it. Well, that technique, how to achieve that technique, is the subject of U.S. patent number 5255452, which is entitled Method and Means for Creating Anti-Gravity Illusion. And the abstract of that patent states, a system for allowing a shoe wearer to lean forwardly beyond his or her center of gravity by virtue of wearing a specially designed pair of shoes which will engage with a hitch member movably projectable through a stage surface. The shoes have a specially designed heel slot, which can be detachably engaged with the hitch member by simply sliding the shoe wearer's foot forward, thereby engaging the hitch member. Turning that from patent ease or patent talk into regular person's talk. So Michael Jackson and all those dancers would wear a special heel that had a notch in it or an opening. In the stage or in the, I guess in the video, they're in a set that looks like a clubhouse of some kind of gangster, but there were posts that would come up out of the floor. You could hook the heel of the shoe over the post, it would lock in, and then you could lean over and perform the effect or the illusion, the kind of anti-gravity illusion where you're over your center of gravity and you could come back up. And they were able to patent that. Now, commercially, I would say, what could you do with this patent? I guess you could stop other dancers from doing this, but really, who other than Michael Jackson in the Smooth Criminal video would perform this kind of move? So I guess we could say some of these patents might be not the Eddie Van Halen ones, because they are on guitars today. But some of the celebrity patents may be vanity projects, because what is the commercial value? How many people are going to want to do that particular Smooth Criminal anti-gravity move? Probably not that many. But if they wanted to, they would have to license this patent or they would be infringing this patent. So moving away from the world of music, let's get in our patent time machine and go back in time. And that would have been a great setup if there was a patent that had to do with the movie Back to the Future or Michael J. Fox. Neither is true. I just wasted a really good segue and a really good setup for Back to the Future. But going back to 1849, Abraham Lincoln, who was certainly someone who had many professions and was known for many things. I believe he may have been president. We'll look that up. I'll put something in the show notes if we get any information on that. But Abraham Lincoln actually invented something called, this was patented May 22nd, 1849. It was called manner of buoying vessels. And what this was is something you could use to move your boat or canoe over rocks in the water, let's say. And it was a way to help lift and move your boat so that it, of course, wouldn't hit the shoals and sink. Um, so it just adds more to kind of a legend, if you will, of someone who was known for being involved in many different things, from being, a lawyer to being a president. Again, I'll check on that to make sure. I don't want to give any false information. To also being an inventor. So that was one of interest. I would say, is he a celebrity? I think so. I think he's a celebrity. They made a movie about him, I believe. So another performer slash celebrity, Harry Houdini. Now it's interesting. I was certain when I looked up Houdini, I would not find patents on any of his magic tricks, even though they had various unique and very interesting mechanics involved. But of course, if you put something in a patent, and this is unique to the patent system, one of the reasons they give patents is to have people disclose their inventions to the world. That's part of what the deal is with your patent. The US government says, listen, we will give you a limited monopoly if you disclose to us how you make your invention. That is the deal or the contract you're making with America, if you will, to get your patent. You disclose it, it becomes public, you get a limited monopoly, and after that, everyone could do it. And this way, we get to have progress in the arts, in the inventive arts. When you invent something, you get your patent, you can commercialize it, you could exclude others from making your patent. But when your patent is finished its term or your patent expires, now it goes into the public domain and anyone could do it. And this way we're moving technology forward because we keep having people share their inventions. Of course, I didn't think I would find any of his magic tricks or the crates that he would escape from, even though they had complicated latching and secret systems, because he didn't want to disclose those. But he was an expert diver and an expert swimmer. And there's a patent from March 1st, 1921, 1370316, which is a diver suit. And it is a specially created diver suit that he invented that was different than other diver suit. It was unique in that it had a lot of different latching systems to keep it together. If you're picturing one of those old timey diver suit with the giant kind of helmets and a tube coming out of the back of it, a hose, you are exactly right. That's what the drawings look like, and we'll post that with the show notes. Moving a little bit forward in time, Walt Disney has his name attached to a few patents. One of those is an animation table. This is from May 21st, 1940. And there's as you can imagine, one of the things about Disney was they were one of the first to create more lifelike movement of characters in animation, and that's what this patent is directed to. A movie star, Hedy Lamarr, she was an actress. She lived from 1914 to 2000. Her real name was Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler, and her patent was actually under her last name, Markey, Markey, or Markey. Not only was she an accomplished actress, but she invented, and people are sometimes surprised to hear this, but it's an interesting story. I think it's so interesting. We'll probably talk more about it on another podcast. I'm going to talk about it quickly on this episode. In trying to help the war effort, she was also very brilliant and worked with another inventor to come up with a system for trying to track torpedoes using radar. And the system that they used ended up bringing a precursor to secure Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth, believe it or not. So this is from 1942, something so brilliant that eventually the technology morphed into technology that we're actually using in the wireless world today. Great story. We're going to talk about it more in another episode. But staying in the world of actors and actresses, Jamie Lee Curtis of Halloween fame or Trading Places, A Fish Called Wanda. Tune in for more names of movies on the IMDb podcast. But for now, let's talk about her patent, which was from June 28th, 1988. It's patent 4753647, called an infant garment. And what this was is a baby diaper having a pocket that will keep moisture out. And in that pocket, you can keep some baby wipes. And that way you do not have to carry a separate holder for baby wipes or a package for baby wipes. It's very straightforward patent and seems like something very useful. So when she wasn't getting chased in horror movies, she was inventing. A famous director, James Cameron, he is somewhat obsessed with water. He has had many deep sea exhibitions. His movies reflect this. The movie The Abyss, and he made another movie about a boat. The name escapes me right now. Something about the boat. There was an iceberg. I think it represented man's hubris. You could probably look it up. It's a little known movie if you can catch it. But he was very involved in deep sea diving, and he invented patent 4996938, called apparatus for propelling a user in an underwater environment. It is a motorized device. So it has two motors on this sides, and it propels in the water, and a diver could hold the grips and it will pull you through the water where you point yourself, which allows for obviously more movement and deeper movement for a diver underwater. And this was actually used in his documentary that he produced, which I don't have the name of, a few years ago, with some deep sea exploration. Next up in our celebrity cavalcade of inventors is Christie Brinkley. She invented an educational toy, patent 4998883 in 1991, which is entitled Educational Toy, interestingly enough. And it is true. I will say this. I'll take a time out here and say some of the patents don't have exciting names. And they may want to engage someone to help work on the names, but that's more of a trademarking question. So we'll leave it to a trademarking podcast when we do an episode on trademarking. But this was a toy that had different alphabet parts, and you could put them in different spaces that were in this kind of game board. And she was able to get a patent on that. This one I found interesting. I had never seen it before. Actor Marlon Brando in 2004 patented what is entitled a drumhead tensioning device and method. It's patent 6812394. Of course, Marlon Brando, famous for his method of acting, having some iconic parts over the years. But apparently, in the era of 2002 to 2004, he was involved in some way in drumming. And this patent has to do with circuitry and a drum head where you can, it was a way to tune a drum. And apparently that was one of his musical hobbies. And he was so interested in it. He is the only named inventor on this particular patent. And it was later in his career, obviously, but he obviously had a musical, there was a musical talent or some kind of musical interest that he had. And he went and got a patent on this. Very unexpected to find that. I'm not sure what I thought I would find when there was a Marlon Brando patent, but I didn't think it would be that. To the world of comedy or comedy-like, the comedian Gallagher. The name on the patent is Leo A. Gallagher. Gallagher, you may know from his routine or bit of smashing watermelons. Well, he actually invented an electronic slot machine which had animations, and the animations would be tied to how much the casino player won. And of course, figure 6 of the patent is actually a watermelon smashing. So he had an interest. I'm sure, by the way, on his comedy circuit, he played many casino showrooms, and perhaps he was wandering around in some free time or before or after a show. And he thought, you know what would be interesting if we had animated. And by the way, this was in 2011. This was in 2011, patent 7972210. By the time it got issued, it was actually filed in 2006. issued in 2011, which that is a long process. Sometimes the patent process can be long, and this was one of those. Now today, so this patent is from 2011. Today, you will see many animated slot machines, and I think that he may have been one of the early inventors of that type of concept. And finally, to round out celebrity inventors, we have Steven Spielberg invented a patent that issued in 2012. It's patent 8091028. It's titled Method and Apparatus for Annotating a Line-Based Document. And what this is during the movie making process, scenes have to match up. They're sometimes filmed out of sequence. They have to match up with music. They have to match up with special effects. They have to match up with the if there's voiceover. So this invention relates to a voice-controlled annotation method. So you could just say things into a computer and you could annotate certain scenes. So you can imagine Steven Spielberg, in the back of a Jeep, and they're filming a chase scene for one of the Raiders of the Lost Ark movies, or one of the Jurassic Park movies, or one of his other action-based movies. And rather than stopping and making a note or annotating, a notebook where you could lose your place, you could speak into this system and just give direction that would then be tied to the script or tied to what was being recording. And that was the basis of that invention. So as you could see, celebrities, they're just like us in that they also can get patents. And some of them might have questionable commercial value. Some of them very useful. Some are from some of my musical idols. But I hope you find something interesting. But you don't have to be a celebrity to get a patent. So if you heard about some of the inventions we talked about today on IP Goes Pop and thought to yourself, wait, I thought of something better than that, or I thought of something even more interesting than what Gallagher thought of, or Marlon Brando, maybe you too could pursue your invention. You could get a patent. And again, you don't have to be a celebrity to get a patent, but guess what? It probably helps. Probably not. I doubt the patent office looks at that any differently. Although I can imagine someone working in the patent office getting a patent from Eddie Van Halen. I would definitely want to tell that to my other patent friends. At any rate, that wraps this episode of IP Goes Pop. Thank you for listening. We will be back in the worlds of popular culture and intellectual property, having those worlds collide, and we will see you next time.
The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com.